You know, today is a day to celebrate the independence of our nation, to celebrate the sacrifices that many have made so that we can enjoy the freedoms and liberties we enjoy today, and also to celebrate a time to get back together in person again after having been separated for over a year. Isn't it great to be back in person? Yes. And today's also a celebration of what Ferry Farm meant to George Washington, what influence it had on him as he grew from a child just down the road at Wakefield to here at Ferry Farm as a young boy, to a young man, to eventually the commander of the Continental Army and the first president of our United States. But it was his life experience here at Ferry Farm that had an immeasurable impact on who George Washington was to become. Because when they settled here at Ferry Farm, young George found a set of surveying tools. And being the inquisitive young man that he was trying to figure out, what are these tools? What do they do? What is land surveying? How do you survey a piece of land? And it was George that taught himself about how those instruments were used, about how to survey land. And he began by surveying land in this area, starting off doing it just to practice, to understand what it was about. And then soon he was hired by others to survey their pieces of land. And he thought to himself, you know, here's an opportunity for me to turn this from a hobby into a vocation. And he took it upon himself to go visit with Lord Fairfax, who was the royal governor of Virginia at the time. And he went to Lord Fairfax and said, Lord Fairfax, don't you need some of the land here in Virginia surveyed? And Lord Fairfax said, well, indeed, young George, I do. And who should be that person to survey that land? And young George said, well, Lord Fairfax, that should be me. And indeed it was. Young George was contracted by Lord Fairfax to survey many of the lands here in Virginia and what is today West Virginia. In fact, George surveyed lands all the way out to the Mississippi River, to the Ohio River Valley. He was a very adventurous young man. And during that time, he was learning not only about the trade, but he was learning about the different things that were happening in our nation. As he talked to folks, as he traveled to the West, he talked to them about what was important to them, about the foundation of this nation, about the things that they saw before them, about the reason why they left Great Britain to come here, so that they could freely practice their faith. And also the things that were happening at the time, where the Crown of England was placing severe restrictions on the colonists, yet the colonists were not given any representation in the British Parliament. And George was starting to hear those things, and prior to that, actually, George Washington had contemplated joining the British Navy. But through that experience of land surveying and talking to folks as he worked in Virginia, in what is today West Virginia, and places to the west, he began to understand those basic liberties and freedoms that come to us from our Creator, and that nations need to preserve, and that what was happening here in the United States was not what George felt was right and just. And therefore, from that experience of land surveying, George decided that he was going to take a more active role. So as he became an younger man, he took that experience and went down the path of what led him to be the leader of our Continental Army that fought in this revolution, that secured the freedoms and liberties of this nation that we all enjoy today, that folks from George Washington on have fought and died for. The foundations that make our nation special, make it unlike any other nation on the face of the earth, that have motivated folks to raise their right hand, to swear, to support and defend the Constitution of this United States, to put their lives on the line to do so. And many have given their life, have given all for those principles of liberty and freedom. Folks, we are blessed to live in a nation where people are willing to do that. We are blessed to live in a nation based on those foundational principles of our Constitution that were directed from the Declaration of Independence, that make this nation the greatest nation the world's ever known. And folks from across this United States, each and every day, selflessly sacrifice to make sure we can continue to enjoy those liberties and freedoms, Today is a celebration of this Independence Day. It's a celebration of what Ferry Farm meant to George Washington, young George Washington, and the influence that it had on his life and the leadership that he showed in the very early years so that we could become the nation that we have become today. And in remembrance of that, Bill, I would like to present to Ferry Farm a very special publication. This is called the George Washington Atlas. And this was put together by the George Washington Bicentennial Commission. And folks, what this is are the survey plats that young George Washington put together using the same surveying tools that he found here at Ferry Farm. And if you go through this, it's a wonderful piece of history in what George learned and the skills that he developed right here at Ferry Farm. So, Bill, I would like to present this to you in honor of today and in honor of what Ferry Farm has done for our nation and in honor of what you and many others have done to preserve this legacy that has had a tremendous impact on our nation. So, Bill, thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out today. The Lord has blessed us with fantastic weather, so it just tells us He wants us to be back together. So thank you again, folks. I wish God's blessings upon each of you. May God bless our great Commonwealth of Virginia, and may God bless our United States of America.